The Software Leaders Uncensored podcast, where tech leaders grow beyond the code.
You're listening to Software Leaders Uncensored, the podcast for tech execs who are done with BS, for buzzwords and BS. I'm Steve Taplin, serial entrepreneur, CEO, currently writing my second book about what I've learned building 30 ventures, having 20 failures and 10 wins. I've taken companies all the way through going public, franchise companies nationwide, acquired 11 businesses, and raised tens of millions of dollars. The common theme on everything I've done is it's always powered by one thing: custom software. Now through my company Sonify, I help scale software engineering teams with senior nearshore engineers who move fast and deliver. Each episode, I sit down with real software leaders to unpack what's working, what's broken, and how to actually build what matters. So let's dive in. Today, I'm very lucky to have Ken Stott out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Ken has been all the way from a Deloitte risk management consultant through Wall Street IT background. He's been a data architect. He's a big AI guy, and he's currently an enterprise field CTO with Hasura. Ken, happy to have you here, buddy.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Steve. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, let's dive right in. Ken, give a short overview for our listeners of the arc of your career, all the way from Wall Street to Deloitte to leading field CTO operations at Hasura.
Sure. Well, you covered some of it, but let me see if I can just expand on it a little bit. Did start at Deloitte in risk management practice. Really fascinating role where we were focused on the evaluation of complex over-the-counter derivatives. We supported things like expert witness testimony, things like that. That led me to Wall Street. Was director for a bond for the tech for a bond trading desk. Fast forward many roles: CIO at Enron, was in a CIO role at Koch Industries, the $100 billion commodities trading group. I was CIO at a global insurance company. Again, fast forward a little bit, landed as a data architect at Bank of America. Worked through many key initiatives there. Retired. Then Tanmay Gopal, the CEO of Hasura, wouldn't allow me to retire. I came back as the field CTO, where I'm now focusing on helping organizations achieve their strategic objectives using Hasura products.
That is phenomenal. And I'm a believer of the best really have a hard time retiring. You got to have that stimulation. You got to have that excitement of solving challenges. So that's cool that you came back for this role. Ken, for those who are unfamiliar with Hasura, tell everybody what Hasura does and what makes them different.
Sure. Hasura's been around for about 8 years. Started as a kind of a product-led growth company around a product called the Hasura GraphQL engine. They turned that into an enterprise product called the Data Delivery Network, or DDN. And the current top-tier product is really called PromptQL. It's a AI agent product that actually incorporates all the learnings they've learned from all of those other products to help the organizations implement AI in 100% reliable, 100% accurate ways within their organization to achieve, again, strategic objectives, of course.
Gotcha. Now, you're a field CTO, and I know that's a newer term in the industry. Educate everybody what that means from your vantage point.
Well, since it is new, we kind of get to define it ourselves to a certain level.
That's true, and I like it.
However, it's not much different what I've already said. The role is focused on helping other companies understand how to use my products, my company's products, to achieve a strategic objective. So not a sales engineer, not a customer service or customer success engineer, not a support engineer, right? We're at the level above. We're really talking about architecture, even beyond architecture, into people, process automation that surrounds all of that, so that people can really get a really successful implementation of any solution that they're producing that incorporates our products.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned that you had retired and the CEO of Hasura reached out to you. Was that somebody you just had in your network, or was that friend of friends, or how did that come about?
I had met him almost in the last couple of years working at Bank of America, and they were a key vendor.
Okay.
And so I developed a strong relationship with Tanmay. And of course, when I retired, I let Tanmay and others know that I was leaving. And so he was aware.
Gotcha. Okay. And I always like to ask CTOs that because CTOs has been a challenging job. There are certainly a lot of CTOs in transition, and I always like to share highlights on how people landed their roles. Because last time I checked, just applying to every LinkedIn job posting out there that fits what you want usually doesn't do it. It's about utilizing your network, the people you know.
I have never gotten a job through a direct posting ever. It has always been through relationships that I've had. And speaking of which, the CTO and the CIO are really risky jobs. So they're really hard to stay in that C-suite role. And it's really easy to be asked to move on.
I agree. It's been a very volatile position. It's really, especially as, the past couple of years when generative AI has taken off, you have these non-technical C-level execs, board members, shareholders who don't understand technology, who you're trying to weigh what the company's doing. I think I always laugh if we put 10 tech leaders in a room, I think we'd get 10 different definitions of what AI is. And so the CIOs and the CTOs out there definitely have very challenging jobs and a challenging environment to make sure the company's making progress and setting the right expectations.
Yeah, it's something that, that I grew into. And, as I went from sort of departmental to divisional to enterprise level roles, there's just a lot of learnings that you have to acquire in order to be successful in those roles. And not only that, but the culture in each of these organizations as you're moving through them can be very, very different. And making sure that you're very intentional about understanding that culture, how decisions get made so that you can be effective in it is very critical to being a good leader, an effective leader that makes an impact.
I think that's spot on. Great advice. Thanks, Ken. Now I know you're working on intelligent data agents. Talk to us what you're doing there, what problem they're solving, and what's truly making them next gen.
So I think everyone's been going through very, very similar realizations as they've attempted over the last 2 to 3 years of implementing AI and data agents into an enterprise. So I don't think it would surprise anybody if we said that there's been a lot of disappointment in those initial deployments. In fact, there's a study that I read that said over the last 2 years, there's been no change in staffing levels associated with AI deployments. So all of the pronouncements that we're going to have massive, reductions in staff levels as we bring in AI agents, at least has not materialized to date.
And Mark Zuckerberg a few weeks ago made a pretty bold statement that within 5 years, he'll be able to cut 60% of the engineering team at Meta based on these. I actually did a rebuttal and called bullshit on that. I think AI is phenomenal. I think it leads to great efficiencies, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a long time before it's erasing roles. I could see it evolving new roles. It sounds like we're on the same page there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, far be it for me to argue with a billionaire, although I've done it before. But
Me too.
But there are two kind of observations. One is an observation, the other is a belief. But my first observation is I cannot think of any significant technology change, new platform, new framework that has ever been brought into this world that has actually reduced the level of engineers required. What has happened is that roles have changed, or the way we describe roles has changed. The level of productivity has changed, but the absolute associated with improving automation has never seemed to have changed. In fact, it always seems to have gone up, which leads me to this, that people who do what we do, people who are interested in doing what we do, that passion is not going to change. People with that mindset are going to continue to figure out how to use automation to make organizations more effective, more innovative. And that desire for enterprises to compete against their competitors is not going to go away. The desire to use automation is not going to go away. but the tools will change. The roles will change. The way people populate and think about those roles are all going to change, but the level of people isn't. Now, there may be, and I'm probably going on a little too long here, but
No, and I like it because I argue to the death that there are a lot of productivity factors that it helps, especially on the engineering side, things like unit tests and documentation. And there's lots of good ways to have productivity, but I'm not buying into AI is going to replace software developers and software engineers.
well, they might not be called software developers.
Right. They might be called, product AI engineer. I mean, I definitely think it'll evolve.
Yeah, think of the kinds of roles that we talk about, say, in the last 5 years. Half of those roles didn't exist
True.
10 or 15 years ago.
Very
That's
true.
what's going to change is the approach, right? The frameworks, the way we discuss problems, the way we solve problems because we have these new tools. But people who are interested in doing that, they're going to still be around. There will be personal pain. So I mean, we need to have empathy because some people aren't going to make the turn. Some people just don't have an interest. Maybe there's slight differences in aptitude, but the vast majority of people in this journey, right, they're just going to perceive that they need to adjust here, there, change their skill sets.
And everything, and I don't care what role you're in, whether it's CEO, whether it's software engineer, whether it's anything else, you got to adapt or die, period.
Yeah, well,
And you
in
got to
this
stay
case,
on top of
yeah,
trend.
that's
Now,
what technology is. Sorry to.
no, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what technology is, adapt or die. Now, Hasura has done very well through multiple rounds of funding from a company perspective. What are some strategic bets you're seeing with this funding in the future that Hasura is bringing to market?
Hasura is completely focused on kind of the AI revolution, particularly the Gen AI revolution, and understanding how to build tools, but also a more complete sort of stack, an integrated stack that makes it easy, simple to bring reliable and accurate AI to an enterprise. That's really what they're focused on. They have no interest in building LLMs or being part of that. They want to leverage that. They're about building frameworks to take these new platforms to turn them into something that enterprises can actually use.
So let me ask you a question. The biggest thing with an organization maximizing AI and its capabilities is having a good, true source of data that is relevant, that is accurate, that combines the multiple data sources that the company has, and that's being governed and constantly up to date. And without that, it's really hard for an organization to truly embrace it. What's your opinion on that?
Wow, you're my straight man. So obviously that's one of the things Hasura does is we provide a universal data access layer.
Okay.
And there are some other technologies that have some similarities. I'll bring up one like Starburst. Starburst is kind of play in that universal data access layer perspective. I have a few requirements of something that I would consider a universal data access layer. I think you want to limit data movement. Out of the box, the whole idea is you shouldn't have to move data, but you want to create a consistent way to catalog and access many, many different types of data sets using common query languages and protocols. So you ought to be able to support SQL. You ought to be able to support GraphQL. GraphQL is popular. You ought to be able to support REST, gRPC, things like that. On the upstream side, you ought to be able to support not only relational databases, but unstructured data, document stores, graph stores. You ought to be able to support SAS. SAS APIs are a really big deal in enterprises. I got to get Salesforce data, right? And I want to get the most recent Salesforce data. I don't want to have to download it into some relational database so that I can write a report. Right. To me, that's a universal data access layer. And if you can provide that, huge benefit to the AI data agents that have to access that data.
No doubt. No doubt. And I know there's a lot of help needed out there to get organizations fully aligned to be able to do that. And it sounds like that's something your team can absolutely help with.
Percent. And I've worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies and major global banks. And this idea of building a universal data access layer is not lost on anybody. I mean, everyone perceives the value of doing that, but it's amplified once you put AI data agents on top of that. I mean, what you can do with that is amazing. Without that infrastructure, you're hobbled to a great extent.
Now, Ken, as someone who's built across both enterprise and startup environments, how do you balance engineering speed with risk, reliability?
I think first of all, that's a hard question.
Oh, come on. This is Software Leaders Uncensored.
It's also one that I could take in many different directions, so I'll take one. I think the first part is making sure that you have a shared culture and ethos around what good engineering means, and that you've established very strong conceptual architectures that people can align to, and that once you do that, you need to delegate and allow people to be able to build, using those theories, tools, and frameworks that help implement that conceptual architecture. So that's probably not specific enough to satisfy you, but that's my starting.
Hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. And it was a tough question that can go in multiple ways. What?
I will say this. I do think it's very common that there is a failure to establish strong conceptual architecture. And those failures are because it's absent or because it's too prescriptive. And getting that sort of Goldilocks conceptual architecture is really hard. And that's what great enterprise architects are able to do. Great CTOs are able to do.
Very much agree. What, in today's environment, what do you think the ideal tech stack for companies is? And, how should they look at tools and infrastructure today?
Again, hard question, but
Ken, I'm not going to ask easy ones, buddy. You're one of the best out there.
Wow. Say the question again. What's the ideal tech stack?
Ideal tech stack and ideal tools and infrastructure that take advantage of where things are going.
So there is no ideal tech stack, obviously. And second, it's very unusual to be in a greenfield situation anyway. Those are sort of unique opportunities. Most value is being driven in brownfield scenarios where you have to incorporate generally and literally, probably decades of different technology choices that people have made, that you have no appetite for, throwing the whole thing away. And so the key is to figure out, how do I wall these things off in a way that allows the individual departments and divisions that own these various tech stacks to interoperate with all these other departments and divisions in some sort of smart way. I am a big proponent of data mesh, and I think data mesh doesn't really completely answer that question of what is the ideal tech stack. What it does do is it sort of pushes it to it doesn't matter. The real answer is, can individual departments and divisions develop what is ideal for them with the constraints that they have, and then interoperate in some sensible way so that the enterprise can extract value from their efforts?
Gotcha. I like it. I think that's a great response. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges today facing data-centric CTOs?
Building the infrastructure that allows what I just said to actually happen. It's so easy, and this is why data mesh, if it's controversial at all, is no one has really perhaps built all of the tooling that makes it work. And I think you've got to think, and I don't want to get too data mesh crazy here. One of the things that it mentions is Jean-Marc Degani does a great job of explaining this, but you must have data agnostic infrastructure so that those individual departments and divisions can use that centralized infrastructure to achieve their goals, again, without too much prescription. That's the point of data agnostic. And I think to have data agnostic infrastructure means that and this may be the answer to your question, is you have to be extremely metadata driven. So you need to establish the prescriptive metadata that explains how these systems can operate to achieve the goals, the more specific goals of a particular business operation. Does that make sense?
It does.
And I think if you're not imagining, here's a great example is Kubernetes. And I think this is somewhat understood, but Kubernetes is completely prescriptive, metadata driven. And what's phenomenal is if you read a Kubernetes sort of config, is it just sort of makes sense. You can just kind of read it. And if you're familiar with infrastructure, everything they're mentioning kind of makes sense. And yet, so now as a human being, I can read this prescriptive metadata, get value from its description, but I also have systems that can consume that metadata and actually deploy infrastructure and operate that infrastructure the same as that it's been written. So now me, right? I'm maybe a DevOps guy, and the infrastructure that I produce, we're all using the exact same language. That's an incredibly powerful concept. So from a data-centric CTO, he needs to establish prescriptive metadata around the creation of data infrastructure.
Makes sense and good advice. Ken, what's one brutal lesson you wish you would have learned earlier as a CTO?
Well, there are so many that I wish I
Pick
learned
yourself.
earlier. I have a couple. One of them was more of a people issue.
Okay.
And I sent a note. We were basically setting up virtual desktops and removing physical infrastructure from a particular department.
Okay.
And they became really unhappy with that deployment. And I happened to write back to the project engineer that I thought they just didn't get it. And I might have been a little insulting about these people's capabilities. What I didn't understand is that the project engineer had a relationship with the head of that department and shared that email with him. And it sort of taught me the right way to share that kind of feedback and the right way both to express it, the form to express it. Those are all lessons that I had to learn.
It's extremely easy to get frustrated and then shoot off an email you wish you could recant. I've been there, done that.
Yes. Well, but it also meant I didn't understand the relationships of the people in the organization. And so you could either make sure you don't send anything that can't be shared with anyone else, or at least really make sure you know who you're talking to and what the potential is for any conversation with.
Great advice. Ken, thank you for getting uncensored with us today. Really excited to see how you shape the next chapter of Hasura and tech leadership at large. Any final shout outs or advice for tech leaders you'd like to give?
For me, you can't go too high in your thinking. You need to understand the businesses you operate in, how they generate value, and think very deeply about the automation solutions you bring to them. Of course, I'm not sure that that's news to anyone, except when I look across the industry, while that shouldn't surprise anyone, I'm not sure it happens very often. Really think critically about your ability to do that and how well you understand those leaders that you're supporting and that you're really providing things that will really truly drive business value for those organizations.
I like it. Ken, thank you. And that's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin, tech CEO, author, builder of over 30 ventures. If this episode sparks something, share it, subscribe, or send it to somebody in the trenches with you. And stay bold, everybody, and keep building. Thank you.